Someone pays off their last credit card completely. Every balance at zero, every bill on time, no debt anywhere. They feel like they finally did the responsible thing, the thing every financial advice article tells you to do. Then they check their credit score a few weeks later, and it's lower than it was before. Not because they missed a payment, not because they applied for new debt. They did exactly what they were told to do, and the system marked it against them anyway. This isn't a glitch, and it isn't a personal punishment either. It's a direct result of how credit scoring actually works, and the fact that paying off debt responsibly and having a high credit score are not always the same goal, even though almost everyone assumes they are. It sounds almost backwards to say out loud that doing the financially disciplined thing can nudge a number in the wrong direction, but once you understand what that number is actually measuring, it stops feeling like a contradiction and starts feeling like a very specific, very mechanical rule most people were simply never told. Credit scores affect almost every major financial decision in a person's life, from the interest rate on a mortgage to whether an apartment application gets approved to what someone pays for car insurance in several U.S. states. According to data published by major credit bureaus, hundreds of millions of consumer credit files are scored using formulas that most people never see in detail and have never been walked through step by step. Financial literacy content usually reduces this into a short list of tips. Pay on time, keep your balances low, don't apply for too much credit at once. These tips aren't wrong, but they're incomplete because they describe what generally helps without ever explaining the mechanism underneath, which is exactly why so many people follow the advice perfectly and still get blindsided by a score that moves the opposite direction they expected. Understanding the actual mechanism changes how confusing correct financial behavior can look from the outside and reveals a system that isn't rewarding responsibility in the way most people assume. This matters well beyond curiosity, because a lower score at the exact wrong moment, right before applying for a mortgage or refinancing a car loan, can mean a materially higher interest rate for years, even when the person's actual financial position has never been stronger. The gap between doing the right thing and the score reflecting it immediately isn't just a mild inconvenience. In dollar terms, it can end up being one of the more expensive misunderstandings in a person's financial life, purely because the underlying mechanics were never explained clearly in the first place. Let's start with the basic mechanics of what a credit score actually measures, because it's less about your net worth and more about a narrow, specific kind of predictive signal. A credit score is a statistical estimate of how likely someone is to repay borrowed money as agreed, calculated primarily from the information inside your credit report. The major scoring models weigh several factors: payment history, which tracks whether bills get paid on time; amounts owed, which includes how much available credit is being used relative to the total limit; length of credit history, how long accounts have been open; credit mix, meaning the variety of account types like credit cards, auto loans, and mortgages; and new credit, which flags how many new accounts or inquiries have shown up recently. The technical process behind the scene works like this. Your credit report data updates, usually monthly, when lenders report account activity to the credit bureaus. The scoring formula recalculates using the newest snapshot of that data, and a new number gets generated reflecting the current state of the report rather than any long-term trend. This detail, that scores are recalculated from fresh snapshot rather than tracking the story of what you did and why, is the seed of almost every confusing score movement people experience. Here's the invisible mechanism most people never see. Because it isn't happening in any single factor, it's happening in how those factors interact with each other over time. When someone closes a credit card after paying it off, several things change in that snapshot simultaneously. The total available credit limit across all accounts drops, because that account's limit is gone. If other cards still carry any balance, the percentage of credit being used relative to the new, smaller total limit goes up mathematically, even if the actual dollar amount owed hasn't changed at all. On top of that, if it was one of the oldest accounts on file, closing it can shorten the average age of all remaining open accounts, which affects the length of credit history factor. None of this reflects irresponsible behavior. It reflects the fact that the scoring model is measuring a snapshot of account structure, not a narrative of financial discipline. And paying off a card, if it leads to closing it, can quietly change the shape of that snapshot in ways that look worse to the formula, even though the underlying financial position clearly improved. That there's a similar invisible effect with utilization more broadly. Someone might pay off a card in full every single month, never carrying a balance, never paying interest, doing exactly what every finance guide recommends. But if the statement closing date happens to land right after a large purchase, the balance reported to the bureau that month can appear high relative to the limit, even though it gets paid off completely days later before any interest accrues. The score doesn't know the balance was about to be paid off. It only sees the snapshot reported that month, which means the timing of when a purchase happens relative to a billing cycle can matter more to a credit score than the actual repayment behavior itself. Two real-world patterns make this concrete. Financial counseling organizations that help people manage debt have documented cases where clients who aggressively pay down and close multiple credit cards as part of a debt payoff plan see their scores dip temporarily right after becoming debt-free, specifically due to the combined effect of reduced available credit and shortened account age, before recovering over the following months as new positive payment history accumulates. A second pattern shows up with authorized user accounts. When someone is removed as an authorized user from a family member's older credit card, whether due to a divorce, a falling out, or simply an account being closed, they can lose access to that account's long credit history from their own file overnight, sometimes dropping their score meaningfully even though they personally did nothing differently in their own financial behavior during that period. Consumer finance forums and credit counseling case studies both describe this same surprise reaction over and over. A person who changed nothing about their own borrowing or repayment habits watches their score shift purely because a data point tied to someone else's account disappeared from their file. This challenges the common assumption that a credit score is essentially a report card for good financial behavior, one that should move in a smooth, satisfying line upward as someone makes better decisions. In reality, the score is more like a live inventory snapshot, sensitive to structural changes in account composition that have very little to do with financial character. The friction point here isn't laziness or poor decision-making. It's that popular financial advice compresses a multi-factor statistical model into a short, motivational checklist, which works well enough most of the time, but leaves people genuinely unprepared for the moments when doing the right thing produces a counterintuitive result. Zoom out, and this pattern of a system rewarding structure over intention shows up in plenty of other places. Search engine rankings don't necessarily reward the most useful page. They reward the page that best matches specific technical signals the algorithm was built to detect. Academic grading systems sometimes reward students who format and answer the way a rubric expects over students who demonstrate deeper understanding in a less conventional way. In each case, a proxy measurement, standing in for something harder to measure directly, ends up shaping behavior around the proxy itself rather than the underlying goal it was meant to represent. As more of daily life gets scored, ranked, and quantified by algorithms, most people never see the internal logic of understanding that a system's numeric output is a model of reality, not reality itself, becomes an increasingly practical skill rather than an abstract one. This is precisely why financial educators increasingly recommend checking exactly what a scoring model measures before making a big account decision, like closing a card or removing a cosigner, rather than assuming that any financially responsible action will automatically be read as such by a formula built around narrower, structural signals. So the next time a credit score moves in a direction that doesn't match the effort someone put in, it's worth remembering what that number actually represents. It isn't a verdict on financial character. It's a snapshot of account structure, recalculated on a schedule that has its own quiet logic, one that rarely gets explained in the advice that tells people what to do. Paying off debt is still the right move. Understanding why the score might not immediately agree is what keeps people from mistaking a temporary dip in a formula for a step backward in their actual financial life.